If you're still replanting your containers every single year, you're wasting money. Most people don't even realize it. They go out, buy fresh plants, watch them look great for a few weeks, and then everything dies off. And next season, they start all over again. But here's the thing. There's a smarter way to garden. There are actually perennial plants that don't just survive in containers. They come back stronger every single year. Some of them thrive on neglect. Some barely need water. And a few honestly feel almost impossible to kill. And by the end of this video, you're going to know 21 of them. But more importantly, you'll know how to use them so your containers don't just survive, they actually improve year after year. And trust me, number one, that plant survives conditions that would destroy almost anything else. Now, if you want a garden that gets easier over time instead of harder, go ahead and subscribe. And I'm curious, what's the fastest plant you've ever killed? Drop it in the comments. No judgment here. Let's get into it. Here's the truth most people miss. Annuals are beautiful, but they're temporary. You plant them, they bloom, and then they're gone. That means you're constantly spending money and constantly starting from scratch. Perennials are different. They're an investment. You plant them once, and they keep coming back. Stronger roots, better growth, more blooms over time. And yes, even in containers. The secret isn't just choosing tough plants, though. It's choosing the right ones and combining them in a way where something is always thriving. So let's start with number 21. This one thrives even if you forget it exists. Number 21. Lavender. This is one of those plants that actually prefers a bit of neglect. Too much water? It struggles. Too much attention? It can fail. But give it sunlight and a little space, and it just keeps going. It's drought-tolerant, incredibly fragrant, and it attracts pollinators like bees and butterflies almost instantly. And here's why it works so well in containers. Lavender actually prefers tight root conditions. It doesn't need a massive pot. In fact, keeping it slightly constrained helps it thrive. Full sun is key here. And when it comes to watering, less is more. Let the soil dry out between watering, and you're already doing better than most people. For design, pair it with something that trails over the edge of the container. That contrast between upright lavender and a soft spillover plant creates a really clean, professional look. But if you think that's low maintenance, the next plant handles shade like it's nothing. Number 20. Hosta. If you've got a shaded patio, balcony, or corner that never gets much sun, this plant is going to feel like a cheat code. Hostas are all about foliage. Big, bold leaves that instantly fill space and make containers look full and lush. And once they establish, they're incredibly forgiving. They don't need constant attention. They don't need perfect conditions. They just grow. In containers, they do especially well because you can control their environment, especially moisture. They prefer consistent watering, but they're not fragile about it. And visually, this is where it gets interesting. Pair hostas with ferns or other textured plants, and you create layers. That layered look is what separates basic containers from something that actually looks designed. But if you want something that doesn't just sit there, the next one blooms like crazy. Number 19. Perennial geranium. This isn't your typical seasonal geranium. This version keeps coming back, and it keeps producing color over a long period. It's heat-tolerant, adaptable, and surprisingly resilient. Even if conditions aren't perfect, it still manages to perform. In containers, it stays manageable in size, which makes it ideal for mixing with other plants. And here's where you elevate it. Pair it with ornamental grasses. That mix of soft movement from the grass and steady blooms from the geranium creates a really dynamic look. Now, the next plant doesn't rely on flowers at all. It wins with color alone. Number 18. Heuchera, also known as coral bells. This plant is all about foliage. Deep purples, bright greens, even reddish tones, depending on the variety. And the best part? That color stays consistent for most of the year. It handles partial shade really well, which makes it incredibly versatile in containers. And because it's compact, it fits easily into mixed arrangements. For design, this is where contrast matters. Use Heuchera to break up green-heavy containers. It adds depth, texture, and a more polished look instantly. And once it's established, it's low maintenance. But if you want something that almost refuses to die, the next one is on another level. Number 17. Sedum. This plant is basically built for neglect. Dry soil? Fine. Poor soil? Fine. Forget to water it? Still fine. Sedum stores water in its leaves, which makes it extremely drought-resistant. And in containers, that's a huge advantage. Because let's be honest, most container plants die from inconsistent watering. Sedum solves that problem. It comes in different forms too. Some grow upright, others spread and trail. That makes it perfect for creating layered containers without needing multiple high-maintenance plants. Design-wise, you can use sedum as a filler or even a spiller depending on the variety. And once it's in place, it just keeps going. But if you want something bold, something that makes an impact fast, the next plant delivers that. Number 16. Daylily. This plant is almost impossible to mess up. It adapts to different conditions, handles heat well, and once it's established, it comes back reliably every year. The blooms are bright, bold, and attention-grabbing. And while each individual flower doesn't last long, the plant produces so many that you still get a long display overall. In containers, daylilies are surprisingly adaptable. They don't need perfect soil. They don't need constant care. They just need decent sunlight and occasional watering. For design, use them as a focal point. Build around them with lower plants or trailing varieties, and you instantly create structure. But not everything needs to be bold and upright. The next plant brings softness. Number 15. Ferns. If you want texture, depth, and a more natural look, ferns are essential. They thrive in shade, love humidity, and once they settle in, they're very forgiving. In containers, they create that lush, full appearance that makes everything feel more alive. They're not about flowers, they're about feel. And when you combine them with plants that bloom or have bold foliage, they balance everything out. Think of ferns as the background that makes everything else stand out. And if you layer them correctly, your containers start to look like something out of a magazine. But if you want something that attracts attention from more than just people, the next plant brings in pollinators fast. Number 14. Salvia. This one thrives in heat, handles dry conditions, and produces long-lasting blooms that bees and butterflies love. It's one of those plants that just keeps going. In containers, it performs especially well because you can give it the sunlight it needs consistently. And once it's established, maintenance is minimal. For design, pair it with softer plants or trailing elements to balance its upright growth. And here's the thing. We're just getting started. Because coming up, there's a plant that blooms bright yellow for months, and another that completely changes how your containers move and feel. Let's keep going. Now here's where things start to get really interesting. Because the next few plants don't just survive, they dominate containers in ways most people completely overlook. Number 13. Coreopsis. This plant is pure energy. Bright yellow blooms that seem to go on forever, especially through the warmer months. If your containers ever feel dull or lifeless, this is the kind of plant that instantly fixes that. And it's not just about looks. Coreopsis is tough. It handles heat, tolerates dry conditions, and once it's established, it doesn't demand constant attention. In containers, it performs best when you give it full sun and well-draining soil. Beyond that, it pretty much takes care of itself. And here's where you take it to another level. Pair it with darker foliage plants. That contrast between bright yellow flowers and deep green or purple leaves creates a container that actually stands out from a distance. But if you think that adds visual impact, the next plant changes the entire movement of your container. Number 12. Japanese forest grass. This isn't about flowers at all. This is about flow. The way this grass arches and moves in the wind gives your container a softness that most people never think about. And that movement, it makes everything feel more alive. It thrives in partial shade, which makes it perfect for areas where most flowering plants struggle. In containers, it acts as a natural filler, but it doesn't just sit there. It creates motion. And that motion is what makes a container feel professionally designed instead of randomly planted. Use it alongside bold plants to soften the look. or combine it with trailing plants to create layers that feel natural and effortless. Now, quick tip before we hit the next one. If you're just picking random plants and throwing them into pots, you're missing the real power here. The magic happens when you combine plants, so something is always blooming, something is always adding texture, and something is always drawing attention. That's how you build containers that never look empty. Now, number 11. Echinacea, also known as coneflower. This one is tough. It handles drought, heat, and poor conditions better than most flowering plants. And once it's established, it becomes incredibly reliable. The blooms are bold, structured, and long-lasting, and they attract pollinators like crazy. In containers, Echinacea works best when you give it space and sunlight. It doesn't like being overcrowded, so let it stand out a bit. Design-wise, this is another great focal point plant. Use it as the center, then build around it with softer or trailing plants. And if you want something that spills over your container in a really satisfying way, the next one does exactly that. Number 10. Creeping Jenny. This plant is all about contrast. Bright green, trailing growth that cascades over the edge of containers. It instantly softens hard edges and makes everything feel fuller. And it grows fast. In containers, it acts as a perfect spiller. You plant it once, and it just keeps expanding outward. It prefers moist soil, but it's flexible enough to handle some inconsistency. And visually, pair it with darker or upright plants to create that layered look. That combination of height, fullness, and trailing movement is what makes containers stand out. Now, if you're working with shade, the next plant brings something completely different. Number 9. Astilbe. This one thrives where many plants struggle. Shade-heavy areas? No problem. Astilbe produces these soft, feathery plumes that add both height and texture. It's not aggressive, it's elegant. And in containers, it gives you that layered look without overwhelming the space. It does prefer consistent moisture, so don't let it dry out completely. But aside from that, it's relatively easy to manage. Design-wise, combine it with hostas or ferns for a shade-friendly container that still feels full and dynamic. But if you want something classic, something instantly recognizable, the next one delivers that. Number 8. Shasta Daisy. Clean, white blooms with bright yellow centers. Simple, but incredibly effective. This is the kind of plant that brightens up any container instantly. And it doesn't just bloom once, it keeps going with proper care. In containers, it prefers full sun and well-draining soil. And once it settles in, it's pretty low maintenance. For design, use it to create contrast. Pair it with darker flowers or foliage so the white really pops. And if you want something that extends color later into the season, the next plant steps in right when others fade. Number 7. Black-eyed Susan. This is your late-season performer. Bright yellow petals with dark centers that stand out from a distance. It thrives in heat, handles tough conditions, and keeps blooming when many other plants are slowing down. In containers, it's surprisingly adaptable. Give it sunlight and decent soil, and it'll reward you. Design-wise, this is great for extending your container's visual life. Combine it with earlier bloomers so your container transitions smoothly through the seasons. Now, if you want something more compact, something that adds fragrance too, the next one is a solid choice. Number 6. Dianthus. Small, colorful blooms with a subtle, pleasant scent. It's compact, which makes it perfect for smaller containers or tight combinations. And it blooms for a long time. In containers, Dianthus prefers full sun and well-draining soil. It doesn't like being overwatered, so keep things balanced. For design, use it as a filler between larger plants. It adds color without overwhelming the arrangement. And if you're building layers, this is a kind of plant that ties everything together. But if you want something that spreads fast and fills space quickly, the next one does exactly that. Number 5. Ajaga. This is a ground cover that adapts beautifully to containers. It spreads low and wide, creating a dense layer that fills gaps quickly. And it thrives in shade, which makes it incredibly useful in tricky spots. It also produces small spikes of color, adding a bit of visual interest beyond just foliage. In containers, Agiga works as a living base layer. It keeps things full, reduces empty space, and creates a finished look. Design-wise, pair it with taller plants to create contrast between low and high growth. And once it's in place, it doesn't take much to maintain. But now, we're getting into the top 4. And these are on another level. Because the next one thrives in heat, drought, and poor conditions. And still looks incredible doing it. Let's keep going. Now, we're into the top tier. These are the plants that don't just survive, they dominate. Number 4. Russian sage. This plant looks delicate, but don't let that fool you. It thrives in heat, it handles drought, and it keeps going in conditions where most plants would completely fail. Those soft, airy purple blooms, they create a haze of color that makes containers feel light, almost weightless. And that's what makes Russian sage so powerful in design. It doesn't just sit there. It changes the entire feel of your arrangement. In containers, it prefers full sun and well-draining soil. Too much water? That's when it struggles. But give it dry conditions and sunlight, and it performs beautifully. For design, pair it with bold, structured plants. That contrast between soft and strong creates a really balanced, professional look. And if you want something that goes even further, the next plant is built for extreme conditions. Number 3. Gaillardia, also known as blanket flower. This one is relentless. Heat? Fine. Dry soil? Fine. Long days of sun? Even better. And the blooms? Bright reds, oranges, and yellows that feel almost painted on. It's one of those plants that doesn't just survive tough environments, it thrives in them. In containers, Gaillardia is incredibly forgiving. You don't need perfect soil. You don't need constant watering. You just need to avoid overdoing it. And that's the pattern you're probably noticing by now. Most of these hard-to-kill plants actually prefer less attention, not more. For design, use Gaillardia to inject bold color. Pair it with softer greens or neutral tones so it stands out without overwhelming everything else. And if you think that's impressive, the next plant does something most perennials don't. Number 2. Hellebore. This one breaks the rules. While most plants are waiting for warmer weather, hellebore is already blooming. Late winter, early spring, this is when it shows up. That means your containers don't have to look empty during colder months. And that's a huge advantage. Because one of the biggest problems with container gardening is seasonality. Things look great for a while, then everything fades. Hellebore fills that gap. It thrives in shade, handles cold conditions, and once it's established, it's extremely reliable. In containers, it prefers rich, well-draining soil and consistent moisture, but it's not overly demanding. And visually, those nodding blooms add a unique, almost subtle elegance. For design, combine it with early spring plants or evergreen foliage, so your container stays active even when most gardens are still waking up. And now, we're at number 1. This is the plant that almost feels unfair, because no matter what you do, it just refuses to die. Number 1. Snake plant. This is the ultimate survival plant. Low light? No problem. Forget to water it? Still alive. Irregular care? It doesn't care. It adapts. And that's what makes it so powerful, not just as a houseplant, but in containers as well. You can use it indoors, outdoors, in the right climate, on patios, balconies, almost anywhere. And it still performs. The upright, structured leaves give it a strong architectural look. It adds height instantly without needing constant trimming or shaping. In containers, it doesn't need much space, doesn't need frequent watering, and doesn't demand perfect conditions. It just keeps going. And here's the truth. If you struggle to keep plants alive, and this one doesn't make it, then it's not the plant. But for most people, this is where everything changes. Because once you realize how resilient the right plants can be, you stop overthinking everything. Now, before you go and start planting randomly, let's lock in the part that actually makes all of this work long-term. Because choosing the right plants is only half the equation. How you plant them matters just as much. First, drainage. This is non-negotiable. If your container doesn't drain properly, even the toughest plants can fail. Water needs a way out. Otherwise, roots sit in moisture, and that's when problems start. So always make sure your containers have drainage holes. Second, container size. Too small, and roots get cramped too quickly. Too large, and water retention becomes harder to manage. You want a balance. Enough space for growth, but not so much that the plant struggles to establish itself. Third, soil. Regular garden soil doesn't work well in containers. You need a mix that drains well, but still holds enough moisture. That balance is what keeps roots healthy. Fourth, watering. Most people overwater. And by now you've probably noticed. A lot of these plants actually prefer less water. So instead of watering on a strict schedule, pay attention to the soil. Let it dry slightly between watering. That alone will solve a lot of problems. Fifth, seasonal awareness. Even though these are perennials, conditions still change. In colder climates, some may need protection. In hotter climates, some may need a bit of shade during extreme heat. Understanding your environment makes everything easier. And finally, design. This is where everything comes together. Stop thinking in terms of individual plants. Start thinking in combinations. Every container should have something tall, the focal point, something full, the body, and something trailing to soften the edges. That combination alone transforms how your containers look. Then layer in seasonality. Choose plants that bloom at different times so your container never feels empty. Spring, summer, fall, even winter in some cases. Now you're not just planting, you're designing. And that's the shift that changes everything. Because once you understand this, you're no longer guessing. You're building something that improves over time. That's the real advantage of perennials. They don't just survive, they get better. Stronger roots, fuller growth, more impact every year. So, instead of starting over every season, you're building forward. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these plants are you adding first? Or which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found this helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who keeps replacing their plants every year. Because once you switch to the right perennials, gardening stops feeling like work and starts feeling like progress. Keep growing and enjoy your garden.